Dry leaves crunched beneath his worn shoes as he went between the corn stalks. Sweat trickled down his spine despite the seasonal chill in the air. He heard the police radios crackle. He could feel their hosts closing in. This was a really bad idea. You're listening to True Crime Culinary. I'm your host, Leah Jack. Let's sink our teeth into this story. Whew, okay. This story takes place in 2019 in Petaluma, California, a little bit of a hometown. Sources include an article from KTVU and an interview from ABC News. So we got a real champ here. His name's Ryan, and he is stalking his ex-girlfriend. He's showing up at public places where his girlfriend's son is playing sports. Later we find out that Ryan has not only hacked his ex's accounts, but he's also attached a GPS tracker to her car. So we know not a single green flag has been seen for many a moon for this guy. While he is stalking, Ryan is living in a camp of people experiencing homelessness. He hears the police are coming to find him. I don't quite understand how, whether they showed up or if he just kind of literally heard it through the grapevine. But he decides to run, and he runs to a cornfield, hides amongst the stalks. But a couple hours later, the police are able to find him. He's arrested. And did I chuckle when one of the articles said this was a corny chase? Yeah, sure did. In case you're wondering kind of what we're looking at here, according to the officer interviewed by ABC7, the cornfield is about 4 acres large. It's 64 tennis courts. You're welcome. Now, the stalks each are between 5 and 12 feet tall, so that's why we see corn stalks included in many a horror movie and the beginning of Lord of the Rings. Ryan was arrested, quote, without incident, on suspicion of restraining order violation, attempting to dissuade a crime victim, obstructing officers, and for prowling a warrant. For a prowling warrant. There we go. Now that we have Ryan out of the way, let's get to the fun part. What is the culinary connection? Before we dive in, I tried to find a variety of perspectives for this summary because I know corn is of high importance to Indigenous communities, so I wanted to make sure that I included sources of Indigenous backgrounds. My sources are in the show notes, featuring an article from the Smithsonian, which I have had to record no less than 5 times, and an article featuring Chef Hadassah Peterson. We must rewind 9,000 years. We're in southwestern Mexico, where people find wild grass that had little itty-bitty tiny ears of corn on there. They each only had a couple kernels each, and the cobs, if we can call them those, were really only as big as your pinky finger. So the babiest baby corns there ever were. But our ancestors were undeterred. They thought, you know what? Let's get to some selective breeding. So they start doing that, and they start bringing out the traits, more of the traits of what we see today. Through our friends in the archaeobotany department, which I will just say I did not see on career day, would have been real cool. But they analyzed DNA of corn and can see that there were traits that moved between South America and Mexico. Corn, specifically teosinte, did I mispronounce that probably, was kind of progressing concurrently in multiple locations because of that movement between South America and Mexico. It is believed that the productivity really took off around 4,300 years ago. Now bring it forward. Think fall colors, sweater weather. And I find this article from Chef Hadassah Patterson, a chef and freelance writer whose family has a long line of food experts. Quote, my maternal grandmother was the private chef for a Duke University chancellor during the 1950s and 1960s. My father and grandfather worked in local restaurants, and Daddy ran his own community store for a while. Chef Patterson, of Indigenous heritage, talked about what corn meant to her as a staple of her multi-racial diet. She highlights corn has over 100,000 varieties and that we can see genetic matches between Cherokee tribes from pre-colonial to now. But you might be saying, hey, wait a second, I see corn everywhere in the world. And that's because of colonizers. So when they started coming to the Americas, corn started to be circulated around the world. It was used in different forms to feed the enslaved and the rich. How it was fed to them, very different. The colonization and movement towards mass production has cut the number of varieties by about 80% and pushed corn production to be less diverse and less healthy. Why is that? Mainly because of efficiency. I am super sad to report The cheapest kind of corn is what is used in tortilla chips and corn chips, which are, yes, the 5th or 15th food group in my pantry. They're a vehicle for salsa for me, also chunks of cheese if I'm desperate, judgment-free zone. But in this article, I also learned about the Three Sisters garden concept. Picture a bright green bean vine curling around a golden corn stalk with fat orange squash hiding underneath, or pumpkins if that's your jam. The Three Sisters garden is the historical approach of planting corn, beans, and squash together as a trio of delightfulness. In her article, Chef Patterson mentions Chef Dave Smoke McCluskey, a Mohawk and evangelist of the Three Sisters garden approach. He says, quote, "The Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash, have traditionally served as a cross-tribal cornerstone to indigenous American cuisine," end quote. These aren't all yellow corn, but multi-corn, in case you're visualizing it, which I have done. Now back to the Three Sisters. Okay, power trio, as I mentioned, but why? Of course, I had to figure this out and tell you. The Three Sisters garden approach is so effective because of a few reasons. Wherever you grow food, we have to replenish the soil with the elements the plants needed, kind of like how we have to replenish what's in our refrigerator. We have to go somewhere and we have to get it, or something has to magically appear, so let me know if you're growing apples in your kitchen. The other thing is, whatever we eat, we need a variety. And if you were to eat just corn, you would end up with a vitamin deficiency. Niacin is what you would be deficient in if you wanted to go Google it. The Three Sisters garden approach helps give balanced nutrition to the humans, but it also has regenerative properties to the soil. So, in addition to just being totally beautiful, it helps keep people healthier, helps keep the soil healthier, and also helps resist pests. How, you ask? Fear not, I have a quote from an NIH article. Corn provided support for beans. Beans provided nitrogen through nitrogen-fixing rhizobia bacteria that live on the roots, and squash and pumpkins provided ground cover to suppress weeds and inhibit evaporation from the soil. So like a totally badass veggie ecosystem. I believe this was happening 500 years before colonizers came to the Americas. So, why am I talking about this? How is it relevant to Ryan running into the stalks? Well, unfortunately, the Three Sisters method is not used widely these days. Farmers often focus on monocultures, or one crop at a time, because it's more efficient. There are a ton of trade-offs, which I won't go into, so don't worry. But because of that, that's where we have cornfields, instead of cornfields with a bunch of beans and pumpkins and squash for us to trip over. So our stalker, a beneficiary of monoculture of corn, runs into the corn maze. But since when do we have corn mazes? Well, the answer is from 1993. That is when we have the first mention of a corn maze, and it was made by Don Frantz, a creative director who has worked in big shows like the Super Bowl and on Broadway. He decided to make one in Pennsylvania after seeing a cornfield from the sky and thinking, I bet I could get people lost and mildly alarmed in there. So he ropes in a co-creator, Brett Herbst, which I find extraordinarily funny because Herbst means fall in German and it feels very apropos. But I digress. They made their first corn maze in 1993. It was a total hit, and since then, Herbst has been making something like 220 corn maze designs every year. Like, those mazes be poppin'. So that's how we get corn mazes. I don't know about you, but I thought they'd be around way longer. I'm also excited I got to learn a little bit more about Indigenous history, and I have a few more factoids to talk about this time of year. Be ready. Anyway, I hope I didn't talk your ear off. Even if I did, I really enjoyed learning about the Three Sisters and will definitely try it in my garden next year. Until next time, stay curious and be careful what's in your cup. Check out our show notes for sources, hit that subscribe button, rate and review the podcast anywhere you listen. If you want to follow me outside of the podcast, check me out on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at But First Bread, where I share clips from the podcast, recipes you can cook safely at home, and plenty of food and fashion fun. Until next time.